Welcome back to season 3 of the Sober Motivation Podcast. Join me, Brad, each week as my guests and I share incredible and powerful sobriety stories. We are here to show sobriety is possible, one story at a time. Let's go. In this episode, we have Greg, who opens up about his tragic childhood marked by his father's death in a drunk driving accident and being raised by a single mother. He talks about his struggle with substance abuse, including dealing drugs and numerous arrests. Eventually, Greg realized the turning point in his life, an encounter with a priest who introduced him to a different way of living, which became the foundation of his recovery journey. Greg highlights the importance of sobriety, recovery, and wellness in his life, discussing how he started the recovery program Startup Recovery, as well as his realization about the need to work on himself and grow up in order to be a good father and husband. With 29 years of sobriety, this is Gregg Champion's story on the Sober Motivation Podcast. What's going on, everyone? Welcome back to another episode. Very exciting, hitting 1 million total downloads. If you saw that on Instagram, started the show back in November of last year, and what an incredible run it has been. Over 130 stories, I believe. My buddy Noel will correct me. He knows the exact amount. But I just want to give another huge thank you to everybody who's been checking out the show, sharing it with your friends, sharing it with the people maybe at your meetings or people that you know that it could be helpful for. I get so many messages and emails, and I'm just so grateful that the people are willing to share their stories and that them sharing their stories is helping you either get sober or stay sober, because that's ultimately what it's all about. Thank you, thank you, thank you. I also want to mention too, if you guys are enjoying the show and it's been helpful in any way, your support would be incredible. You can donate to support the podcast at buymeacoffee.com/sobermotivation. It would mean the world, helps me cover some of the costs of keeping this podcast going. I'll also drop that link in the show notes below. And also, if you're not following Sober Motivation over on Instagram, do that, because we're going to do an 8-hour live with guests and fans of the show. My goal is to do it on March 7th, next Thursday. If you can pop in and say hello, that would be incredible. I would love to see a few of you there. Now let's get to the show. Welcome back to another episode of the Sober Motivation Podcast. Today we've got my buddy Greg with us. Greg, how are you?
Hello, Brad. Good to see you finally. And thank you so much for giving me the opportunity to speak to you today on your podcast.
Yeah, 100%. Thanks for being willing to share your story with us all. So what was it like for you growing up?
You know, I got into drama right away. My father was killed in a drunk on drunk car crash when I was 4.5 years old. And Brad, when I woke up the next morning and I thought my mom was going to wake me up for school, and she says, she tells me that the news that happened, I immediately felt different. And I felt different in three ways. One, and I do believe this is part of what I was addicted to. First of all, I was angry because you had a dad, Tim had a dad, Stephanie had a dad, everybody else had a dad, and I no longer had a dad. Two, I loved fantasy. And so as I was being raised by a single mother as an only child, I had to create my own little world. And what I did is I lived off of television, Happy Days, $6 Million Man, Charlie's Angels. When I grew up, I wanted to be Luke Skywalker. And then last but not least, I loved attention. I loved attention. And I had blonde curly hair, and blue eyes, and so I got a lot of attention from babysitters and, my mom's friends, and that female energy coming at me, it filled the hole. And so for me, raised by a single mother, no dad, and then really another thing to throw in there, and I wasn't always able to talk about this. When I was 8 years old, there was a male neighbor who was inappropriate with me, and that just threw gasoline on the fire. And so that's childhood right there. That's my childhood, but from age 4.5 to 10.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of stuff, right? Definitely. How did you move in the world after that? Did you get in any trouble? Did any of that stuff come
Well,
into your life?
so my mom tried really hard. I was a hyperactive kid, and my mom put me in sports, and I was fairly good in sports. You played soccer, you played football, you played baseball, and you're just going through the rotation. But I'm not proud of it, but I ended up being, grooming myself into being a bully. I ride around on our BMX bikes, and we'd knock down mailboxes and set things on fire and pick on kids and all that. And all I was doing is, as they say, hurt people, hurt people. Well, hurt kids hurt kids. And so I found myself in detention all the time. And the only thing that kept me in school was I was pretty smart. I got straight A's, and people couldn't figure out why this guy was such a tyrant out of the classroom, but so good in the classroom. Until this day, I still don't know, you know? But that's how I was made up. And luckily, I had a really good mom, loving mom. She was a school teacher herself, but a single mom can't keep an eye on the kid 24/7. So I definitely took advantage of the holes that were presented to me.
Yeah. I mean, I can relate with you too. I found myself in detention, often alone, early on in life too. I was wondering, they had this in-school suspension that you would go to in like grades 6, 7, and 8, and rarely was there ever anyone else in there. It was just kind of me breaking the rules, and you feel that, right? At the time, I thought, oh, it was cool, it was slick because I'm acting out in this way. But then when I look back, like my real feelings were that I really started at that point in my life to really feel different than my peers and sort of move away in that direction. Where do things go for you after, say, 10 years older?
So my mom remarried, and she married a guy who was there on D-Day, Brad. He's a World War II vet. He used a GI Bill to get an engineering degree from Northwestern. He loved my mother. They met at a New Year's Eve AA Al-Anon New Year's Eve party and struck up a relationship. And before you know it, this guy became my dad. And one of the great things he did was he taught me how to tie a tie, shave my face, open doors for women, all that greatest generational stuff that the generation had values in. And then we moved to San Diego. And I'm like, "Oh my god, I'm so happy I got a dad. He's my little league coach, right? He's my Pop Warner manager. He goes to my games." But guess what? The ism was already set in. The ism was already set in. I still had the bubbling anger, loved the attention, could certainly ride out in fantasy. And then last but not least is that I was starting to get closer to 13, puberty. And for me, when I hit puberty, Brad, it was like, "Whoa, I love girls. Oh, by the way, I'm going into high school as a freshman." I was the youngest in my grade. My mom, as a mechanism of protection, she put me in kindergarten as a 4.5-year-old versus a 5-year-old. So I was always the youngest. So entering my freshman year, here's the pretty girls, here's pot, cocaine, and booze. And oh, by the way, I love shortcuts. And one of my shortcuts was I wanted to be an adult. And one of the ways to become an adult was to go across the border to Tijuana. And so as a very young kid, 14, 15 years old, I would tell my mom, "I'm going over to Brad's house." Brad would say, "Hey, I'm going over to Gregg's house," right? And we beeline to Tijuana. And we, you know, strip clubs and tequila shots and discotheques, right? And all of it was just feeding the secret, that shame. And that's how I medicated myself in my teenage years. Now, what kept me alive is I played sports. And I knew in order to stay on the teams, I had to get grades and I had to show up. Had to get grades, had to show up. So I would say I was probably what do they call it, Brett? A person who just uses on the weekends?
Maybe
What is that called?
recreational?
Yeah, like a recreate. So as
Yeah.
soon as I'm out of school on Friday, I'm drinking Friday night, drinking Saturday night, and I'm hungover all day Sunday.
And that's throughout high school. And you went to
Yeah.
Tijuana, yep, because, yeah, you're in California there, so you're, relatively close. I heard that before. I never knew that was a thing. I never knew, but, I mean,
Oh,
over there, and I'm sure, a couple moons ago that it was a lot more laxed, right? So you would go
oh,
over
yeah.
there and
Back when I was growing up, you didn't even need an ID. You just walked across the border.
wow.
So you drive your own car down, park on the American side, walk across, hop in a taxi. The name of the main strip is called Revolucion, and it was a paradise for addicts and alcoholics, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah.
How were other things going in high school and stuff for you? You mentioned you were doing sports, grades were going well, but there was always this thing. A lot of people too, they talk about this feeling of being home or something when they use a substance or drinking or drugs for the first time, like things it offers that release, that escape. Did you have any sort of experience like that?
So a couple had so let me just so one of the things was there wasn't too many consequences when I was a kid from age 13 to 18. But I do remember my first drink. It was in 8th grade and I was at a parent's Christmas party. And all of a sudden, like we snuck downstairs to the basement, we found the wet bar and I found a bottle of schnapps, peach schnapps. and I smelled it. I'm like, "Oh my god, it smells so good." And so schnapps is just supposed to be a shot glass, right? I poured myself a nice half a glass, began to drink it, and before you know it, this is where they found me an hour later. They found me in the canyon on the backyard of the house, rolling around in the ice plant, you know? And what happened for me was I felt the fun and the buzz, right? But at the same time, I go, "Let's do it again. Let's do it again." And I kept trying to recapture that. And so if I went to a high school party as a freshman, first of all, I was one of the littlest guys in the school. I was very awkward. I had acne. I had buck teeth, and I was not a vision for you, Brad. And all that stuff was coiled by me drinking and using.
Yeah. That's searching for that acceptance to belong. I had a long stretch of that too, where I was willing to do whatever for some acceptance despite the consequences to fit in
Tell me,
somewhere.
so what do you mean? So what was your first drink like?
Well, I mean, I'd always felt different than people. So my first drink would have been at a college party. And all of a sudden, you're that outsider. You're just the person that has to work so hard at developing relationships and having people be interested in what you've got going on. And my connection with that first drink was that euphoric experience of, hey, you know what? After all, you're not such a loser. Look, everybody loves you. And the next day, you get all the text messages, hey, Brad, we can't wait to do it again. And it's a big sloppy mess, but that feeling of, hey, people really enjoy having you around. I experienced that in small doses growing up, but that was just a heavy hit of dopamine that I just couldn't avoid. It was like all of a sudden, you belong, plus all the anxiety and all the nervousness. And I
Right.
mean, I struggled with ADHD too, and I took Adderall and Ritalin and everything for years. And that, I mean, that really just reduced my ability to connect with my peers. And when the alcohol was just a social lubricant that, just kicked everything off.
Yeah. I love, like, alcohol was the gateway to be included, you know? It really was because if you were the best drinker or you could do the beer bong the fastest, right? You were suddenly thrown up on a pedestal, right? You know?
Yeah, 100%. And when I reflect back too, for me, it didn't start out bad, like it really served a decent purpose at first. For me, it wasn't, I didn't experience consequences right away, other than maybe your average person in college, right? Hangovers. And it really did. And I think that's was, jumping way forward in the story. That was one of the toughest parts about getting sober is because when I reflected back, I was looking for that same feeling and that same experience, and I don't think I ever found it again, but I was searching for it for years to get back to how it was that first time or the
Yeah.
first month.
Brad, I mean, so I'll go right to a college story. I went to Arizona State, which is a big party school in the United States, and I chose it for that reason. I'm going to go to a party school. That's where my people are. But I told my mother I was going to go there because it was the Walter Cronkite School of Broadcast Journalism. That was my veil, right? And I remember this is the early 90s and this is when ecstasy was just coming around. And I remember my first hit of ecstasy. It worked. It worked. I was dressed up as one of the Sex Pistols, and my date for the night was dressed up as Dorothy from The Wizard of Oz, and we went down the yellow brick road that night, and it was a fantastic experience. Woke up the next day and I go, "Let's do that again." And what happened was I tried ecstasy another 7 times. I ended up in the ER twice. I ended up in jail once. Like, it was a disaster because I would overshoot the mark each and every time. And so I get that we're chasing the high. But one of the points you bring up is the inclusion part. And what I feel is that one of the things I have found in my recovery community, my 12-step groups, is I found my tribe. I found my tribe. And it feels so good to be surrounded by people who are like-minded, have good souls, have similar stories. And I think that's the greatest bridge from addiction to recovery is promising people who are willing to walk that bridge is you will find your tribe. I promise you.
Yeah, 110%. Those are all things so important. So where do you go from there? You go to college. What's that experience like for you? Because a lot of people, I mean, my experience, a lot of people's things really can ramp up in this, this area.
They certainly did ramp up, but most colleges are protected spaces. And if you think about it, most colleges are 4 streets and the campus resides inside those 4 streets. And I remember I was doing knucklehead stuff all the time, doing knucklehead stuff. But as long as I remained in those 4 streets, nothing happened. I woke up with hangovers, I'd be sick, I got in a few bar fights, broken hearts, all that kind of stuff. But here's what happened. God had a plan. He says, "Okay, you got out of college, and now it's time for you to go out in the adult world." And so on my graduation night, I got a DUI. And what happened was I got arrested 8 or 7 more times over the next 2 years. And so what happened was the universe was saying to me, "Okay, Greg, you're a knucklehead. You're 22 years old. You can't take this college lifestyle out into the real world and try to exist." And I would be like, "Oh yeah, let me show you," you know? And there'd be so many times, Brad, that I would, get drunk, go into a bar, get in a fight, get an assault charge, get another DUI. There's a time that I went to New Orleans for Mardi Gras because I wanted to experience Mardi Gras. I walk up to this big Irish cop and I go, "Hey, what are the rules of this place? I want to know the rules." And he goes, "Young man, don't piss in my streets and don't fight in my streets." So I ask you, Brad, what 2 things I got arrested for in the next 24 hours? Pissing in the streets and fighting in the streets. Because when someone gives me rules, I break them, especially under the influence of drugs and alcohol. And, my life, first of all, my high school friends left me. My college friends left me because I was like a Tasmanian devil. I would drink, and by the time it's 9:30 at night, I would already be gone, and they're still trying to get to 1 o'clock. And so, I really was on a race to get obliterated, to black out, to, you know, I probably in a way, probably fall off a balcony, get hit by a car, take me away from this pain. And here's the best part, I didn't know what the pain was. I did not know what the pain was, you know? I knew something was uneasy inside me, but I wasn't going to counseling. My parents weren't aware enough. No teacher, counselor, coach could say to me to get to me to say, "What's going on inside you?"
Yeah. Yeah, you went to
Mm.
the Mardi Gras. The 2 rules, Greg. You broke the golden
Yeah.
rules. It's interesting though. I mean, you mentioned 7 arrests. I mean, did you ever take a look when you get these DUIs? Do you ever take a look at anything? Is anybody having a conversation with you about this?
My stepfather in high school would have conversations with me because he went to AA meetings. The big book was in our house. I had to go with him on his birthdays and hold the plastic cake, right? And I would say, "What are these funny coins you're passing out? And why are we holding hands at the end? What is this weird thing?" So my whole opinion of AA was just like, ugh. And then he'd say, "Listen, you're hungover. You drove last night drunk." He would give me these things, but like, again, there was no true consequences. And what I think happened in the adult world was my mom and stepdad were semi-retired. They figured I got through college and I was gonna find my way, and to be honest with you, I think they both were working a pretty good Al-Anon program and let me be, but what got scary and when I was able to look at the formula because the formula, Brad, was this: Greg plus drugs and alcohol equal jail, you know? And each time I went to jail, it was for a longer sentence, and it all came to an end because remember, I like shortcuts. And my first job out of college was working at a TV station overnight. I had the overnight shift. So I worked from 6 PM to 3 AM. Well, Brad, let me ask you, who's out there at 3 AM when you get off of work? Lower companions, drug dealers, and those became my tribe. I found those people and I begun hanging out with those people. And I look back, I go, if I think about it, I would never hang out with someone like that. But under the influence of drugs and alcohol, these are my people. And so what happened is one of these gentlemen says, "Hey, college boy, I assume you have a lot of friends all over the country." "Oh, of course, I'm a people pleaser." "Yeah, I got friends all over." He's, "Hey, why don't we start shipping some marijuana to the East Coast?" "Well, tell me why." He goes, "Well, you could probably make as much money as you make in a month in a week here." And so what happened was we began shipping 2 pounds, 4 pounds, 8 pounds, and eventually we got a little business going, and we were shipping 50 pounds of pot back to the East Coast. And I had 3 cars in the driveway. I was living in La Jolla, California. I certainly was living that sort of rock star life, and for a 23, 24-year-old kid, it was good living. But here's what happened. Each time I had to fly these large amounts back east, I remember that I'm a good kid from San Diego with good parents with a college degree, And so that version of Gregg Champion felt a lot of shame. I'm a drug dealer, Brad. And so for me to cover the mask of the drug dealer, I had to get loaded. I had to drink 6 vodka and cranberries. I had to do a bunch of cocaine. And also my alcoholism went to the fucking roof. And what ended up happening is I got sloppy. I got sloppy and eventually I got arrested with 50 pounds of pot. And that was arrest number 7. And the judge says to me, Greg, I'm looking at your record here. You went to private school. You got a college degree. What happened?
Mm.
And I utter these 3 words, which I know a lot of us addicts and alcoholics utter. I utter, I don't know. Because here's why I was standing in front of him as a sober guy. And I don't know because what happens is there's an old movie called American Werewolf in London. And the guy would turn into a werewolf. That was me. You give me enough cocaine, enough pot, enough booze. I'm the werewolf in London. And so when I was standing in front of the judge and I said, I don't know, here's what he says to me. He goes, Greg, here's what I know. If I see you in my courtroom in the next 6 months, I'm going to give you the 5 years of prison hanging over your head. Now, Brad, I told you earlier, right? Blonde curly hair, blue eyes. You think about where 5 years of prison is going to take you, right? Which I know you and I have a similar story, right? And so all of a sudden, I was scared, but I was only scared for about 2 weeks. And then I got arrested again by an undercover cop for trying to distribute cocaine at a party. And there I was in front of the judge again. And I was in the cell and I eventually got bailed out. But then, and I just want to round out the story with this because I'm a big believer in a higher power. I'm a big believer in the universe. I'm a big believer in God. I'm a big believer in some power greater than myself. So whatever your audience wants to buy into, I believe there's a power greater than myself. And when I was in this jail cell, facing 5 years of prison now, a voice from the corner room goes, Greg, there's a better way. Greg, there's a better way. I look around. There's nobody up. It's 5 in the morning. And now the voice goes, call your mother. Brad, I don't want to call my mother because my mother's 60 something years old. She's semi-retired. She doesn't hear about her son going away for 5 years. But I call my mother. My mother says this, Gregory, I'm sure your mother calls you Bradley, or does she use your middle name? Right? That's what, right, Brad? What's your mom
Yeah,
calling you when
yeah.
she's mad at you?
Bradley, yeah, yeah,
Yeah, right? So
100%.
mom's calling by their phone, Gregory, I want you to go to church. You want me to go to church? I want you to go to church. I said, okay. And so I went to church. That's all I did. It's 6 o'clock mass. And after the mass, the priest says, hey, we're going to have confession tonight. I got 3 rooms over here. I got 3 rooms over here. And I thought to myself, my very first time, this is how sick I am. Boy, if I go to confession, I can go out tonight. If I go to confession, I can go out tonight. I go in the confessional, door number 2, and there's this beautiful older man with white hair, laser blue eyes, and an Irish accent. And Brad, in all the years of me telling this story, I cannot do an Irish accent, so I won't. But here's what he says. Son, sit down and tell me your sins. And I sit down and I go, Father, when I drink a lot, I go into bars and hurt people. When I smoke a lot of pot, I show up on Christmas on December 27th. When I do a lot of cocaine, I date 3 women at the same time. And when I do all 3 of those, right, I fly large amounts of marijuana to the East Coast. Now, this priest is probably used to having grandmas come in and give confession. So I've just given him a whole bunch of stuff to chew on. And he says, stop. He says, do you think you have a problem with drugs and alcohol? I ponder and I said, no. And then he gives me that look, Brad, that you would give me as a friend, that your sponsor would give you, that your mentor would give you, that says, hey, you're full of shit. And he gave me that full of shit look. And I said, you know what, Father, you're the second man in my life ever to ask me that. And he goes, well, who was the first? I said, my stepfather. He goes, what was your stepfather's name? I said, Walt Janicki. He reaches across, grabs my hand firmly, looks me in the eye, Brad, and goes, I was Walt Janicki's first sponsor. And so as I connected with this man who knew my stepfather, who I highly respected, I knew there was a man there who was, whatever he was going to tell me next, I needed to listen to. And here's what he said. He says, Greg, your sins don't belong here. They belong 4 blocks up at the Alano Club, and it happens to be at A meeting starting at 7:30, and I think you should go. And so, Brad, I walked my sorry ass up to that meeting. I went to my first meeting. And that date is 11/7/1994, and that's my sobriety date. And I'm so grateful that God came into that room through this man. He knew that maybe religion wasn't gonna save me, but he knew that the 12 steps or that program that's up the road was gonna save me. And what's great about the overall circle is AA has brought me back to understand God in a much more wider, broader way, forgiving way. I'm a big believer in the universe. I'm a big believer in the ripple effect that, hey, if I put good stuff out in the world, guess what's going to come back to me? And I just love that this man came into my life and he ended up being my sponsor. And here's what he said to me. He says, Greg plus drugs and alcohol equals jail. Okay. I go, yeah, 8 times in the last 2 years. He goes, why don't you take that middle part out and see how many times you go to jail? So, Brad, in now nearly 29 years of sobriety, I've gone to jail 0 times. And I always encourage anybody in your audience, I encourage you that if you have some sort of jail going on, a bankruptcy, a bad marriage, you know, jail hanging over your head, take the middle part out. I'll make you the same fucking promise that you will not hit the jail. Drugs and alcohol are the filter to fuck up your life. They just are. By the way, alcoholism is undefeated, Brad. It's like getting in the gym with Sugar Ray Leonard, Mike Tyson, and Muhammad Ali. You're not going to win. And so I went forth. And what I did was I went to 90 meetings in 90 days. I didn't drink or use. And then my sponsor says, you need to take boxing lessons. And so for the next year, I took boxing lessons. And what that did was it got me in shape. It got my head straight. I got in physical, it got me to sweat stuff out. And I think a big part of where I help people is you got to sweat stuff out, you know? And so I'm a big believer in exercise in terms of people's recovery. So that's my God shot moment. And that is the foundation of all my recovery.
Yeah, wow, thanks for sharing that with us. That whole story there is so incredible. What I'm interested in, Greg, is had you tried anything prior to this? You had that experience with your stepdad, right? About me. Had you ever been to a meeting before? Was this your first meeting?
This was my first meeting for myself. This is my first
Okay.
meeting for myself. But what I will say, I did try to get sober. A year before, I went, we're right in the middle of Lent. I said, I'm not going to drink for Lent, right? And instead of giving up alcohol, I just gave up Lent because it was the easier choice. So I don't know, I was probably like 27 days into it or 37 days into it. I said, fuck this. I'm out. I'm going to go back. And so on my own, I stopped, but with no support, no spiritual program, no mentors. But that was the only one time that I tried before to get sober.
So when that all came about, though, because I have a little bit of a different story and everything, but I went to a lot of meetings before I actually completely plugged in. Like, what happened then and there? And I mean, you just shared that story, and that might be the exact answer to this. But what happened there, once you got involved, that you were able to make these changes? I mean, you get suggestions to follow them, but a lot of people get suggestions and don't necessarily follow them. What do you feel like you really put into play there?
So what I did, and I'm just going to be real raw with you, is I was scared to go to prison. I was scared to go to prison. And what happened was the sponsor, who was a priest, says, look, you keep going to meetings, you keep working with me, and I'll go to the judge. I'll keep going to your judge hearings. And so I just believe what this guy said because I'm like, okay, I'll go do it. And so all of a sudden here went 90 days, 180. I didn't want to go. I hated those early days. When I got sober at 25 years old, Brett, there was nobody my age in those rooms. It was all grandpas and grandmas. And these people loved me up. And I just think it was a fear thing. I think it was and what happened is that I saw my life was getting better. I saw I wasn't getting in jail. I saw that my high school friends and my college friends were returning, you know, and my family was returning. I'm like, oh, wow, something's happening out there. And so I think that slowly but surely, as they say, one day at a time, I gathered time. And I certainly have a workaholism in me. And I took on 3 jobs. I was teaching tennis. I was going back to school, and I also was bartending. Now, I don't recommend bartending, but it was the only job available to me my first year of sobriety. This guy offered me a job at a sports bar, and I took it because I know a whole bunch about sports. He goes, look, I just want you to serve drinks and talk trivia with everybody. And I just kept telling myself, The drinks are going this way. The drinks are going this way. The drinks are going this way. And if you're working 3 jobs, you're exhausted. You don't have time to go out. And that's how I really protected my sobriety in the first years. I went to meetings. I had 3 jobs. I got rid of the lower companions and really did a lot of boxing, body surfing, skateboarding, and read books. The first book I read was Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl. And then I read The Artist Way by Julia Cameron. And then I read Conversations with God. And these are all books my mom sent me. Once she knew I was on the recovery path, she started sending me books. And this is a kid who hated to read. I hated to read. And suddenly I was starting to see some soul. I started to see who the real Gregg Champion was. But yet I still had not told anybody that secret of my childhood.
Yeah, it sounds like too, especially taking the bar. I mean, humility, right? That was a big part for me. Just being willing to do things and not just looking at it one day at a time and do the best I could every single day and just keep showing up and then listening to other people around me. You mentioned mentors a lot, sponsorship a lot. It's about listening to other people that have been down the path that things will get better. Because for me, honestly, for the first 6 months, and I've heard this a few other times as things got a lot worse before they got better. Not in the jail areas. I'm with you. Once I removed that middle part, Greg, I have not been back. I've gotten
Yeah,
one speeding ticket,
yeah.
you know, I've gotten one speeding ticket and I think 15 years. And it's the truth. I mean, day in and day out, but taking suggestions from other people that had been there before, mentorship and really connecting with that aspect of things. But I'm with you too as well on when I first started going to my first meetings. I was probably 17 when I went to my first meeting, and it was a lot of older folks. I remember my first sponsor I had, and I did my 5th step. I mean, to talk about the most uncomfortable
Oh, yeah. Oh,
thing,
yeah.
you know what I mean? I was sitting in this rehab. He comes to the rehab, and we're sitting out on this porch, Knoxville, Tennessee, this screened-in porch at this rehab, and I'm just like, I couldn't help but think, "What has my life come to?" But I follow through, right? Because I got to that point, a little bit there that, like, my way just really wasn't working. Like, my way just ended me up in those tough situations.
It's so true. You brought up the 4th and 5th step, right? Boy, I ran from that for a while. I would get a sponsor, I'd get through steps 1, 2, and 3, and then I'd get to step 4 and 5, and I look at it and I go, "Oh, I can't go there. I can't tell anybody." And so then I would go, "Okay," and I would just and this is alcoholism. I pull out of the meeting, go to another meeting, drop the sponsor, right? Go 1, 2, and 3 with another guy, get scared again, and I did that for the first 3 years of my sobriety. Would not go there. Until one day, this guy's speaking from the podium, and he literally tells my story, only child, single mother, sexual abuse, all of this, and I'm like, I gotta go have coffee with this guy. And lo and behold, once I realized I had someone who had just told my story, I could open up and tell everything to. And what he did for me was this: he did the 4 columns, right? But he added a 5th column, Brad. He added the shame column. And he goes, "I need you to put down all the things you have shame around." And boy, that was the thing that just busted it open. I was able to uncover, discover, and discard all that stuff from my childhood, whether it was around sex, money, shame, abuse, whatever. And really, that I've never felt lighter. I mean, I always felt heavy until I did that. And once I did that, now I feel light. And I feel like that's how I was able to now tell you today on your podcast about my childhood trauma. Because for the first 10 years, I was not able to.
Yeah. Yeah, it's really a powerful experience sharing it with somebody else. Did you have any other type of interventions in your life, therapy or any other things that you found helpful?
Well, so later in my recovery, like in the last 10 years, and I'll just say this, Brett, this is something for your audience to chew on. I think that for me, my path, and again, I'm almost 30 years sober, sobriety was the first thing I needed, the first chunk. Then the next middle part was recovery. I needed recovery. I needed to read the right books. I needed to go to a silent retreat. I need to learn how to meditate. And along the way, some people from AA would be like, "Hey, listen, you seem to have a little anger problem still. Why don't you try breath work?" And boom, I went and tried breath work. That was 10 years ago. I love breath work. It's a lifesaver for me. Okay. Then I had some shoulder issues and back issues, and Western medicine wasn't helping. Someone's going to say, "Why don't you try acupuncture?" Tried acupuncture. I still do it today. And then my marriage has been on the rocks twice in 15 years. The first time, somebody goes, "Hey, you should go to couples counseling." I'm not going to couples counseling. That's where weak men go. Weak men go there just to get blown out of the water by their wives, because that's what I saw in movies and television shows. And lo and behold, my wife, "Hey, you need to go to couples counseling." I said, "I'm not going. It's where weak men go." And guess what God did? God gave her the strength to write divorce papers, send them to me. And she says, "You're either going to divorce or you're going to go to counseling." Well, I went to counseling. And look, I get so many God shots dropped in my lap, Brem. The therapist was a 25 years in Al Anon, 19 years sober. And she had the therapy credential on the wall. So she certainly was capable of understanding our story. And what I can tell your audience was my wife sensed there was some secret that she knew. She thought I was cheating on her. She thought I was doing some sort of underhanded thing. And what I never told her about my childhood trauma. And after 8 sessions, I told her that story and she broke down and she started crying. The therapist started crying and she said, "Me too. Me too." And here was a marriage on the rocks with 2 small children. And what I can tell you is that couples therapy works, acupuncture works. And so, Brad, if you were to ask me, "Hey, Greg, how have you been sober for 29 years?" And here's the secret. Here's the effing secret. Remain willing to be willing. Remain willing to be willing. That when someone gives you a direction or a suggestion or idea, you take it. Okay? And especially if you get that same idea or suggestion from 2 people who don't know each other. Say an old high school friend calls you up today and says, "Hey, blah, blah, blah. You know, Brad, I think you should be willing to be willing." Well, guess what? Me and the high school friend don't know each other, but that's the universe telling you, "Hey, 2 of people in your universe, in your ecosystem, Brad, are telling you you probably should go do that." And so the third part of my trilogy is wellness. And that's where I reside today. Brett, I want to live to 90, but I don't want to be one of these 90-year-olds that lives in a walker, right? I want to make sure that I don't get Alzheimer's. I don't want to make sure that I get cancer. So I eat right. I exercise. I make time for my family. I have a balanced life. And so all of a sudden, it's really, that's my trilogy I want to give you and your audiences. Sobriety, you got to get that. You have to get that. Then recovery, and then wellness. And that's where I'm at after almost nearly 30 years of being in it.
Yeah. And even at almost 30 years too. It's always so interesting, right? Because we reflect back to when it all first started and, 99.9% of people have the same thing is we just never really thought at the beginning we would end up where we landed, and it's so interesting to see what one day at a time adds up. It really does.
Yeah. And I can remember, like, when I got my 1 year, I didn't realize it was 1 year, and then all of a sudden there's 3 years, there's 5 years. And what I will tell everybody is there's definitely the 5-year. You get stuck at 5 years, you get stuck at 7, you get stuck at 11. You're going to get stuck. But but here you're at a Y in the road. All the universe is telling you is just take your game up a level. Take it up a level. That's all it's doing. It's testing you because my mother died of Alzheimer's. I stayed sober. My sister committed suicide. I stayed sober. My 10-month-old baby had to have open heart surgery. I stayed sober. I've been fired. I've stayed sober. And so there's some old timers. And again, I would consider myself an old timer. I'm talking about the real old timers. Will say to you, we don't drink or use no matter what. We don't drink or use no matter what, because I guarantee you, if I had drank or used in any of those situations, the whole house gets burned down. And, you know, there's just a few things that I adhere to that I just don't change. And one of them is I go to a lot of meetings. 2 is I always say yes to an AA request. 3, I love sponsoring and mentoring people. And then 4, I remain willing to be willing, you know?
Yeah, that's all beautiful. Giving back and being of service, I mean, it's so incredible. And you do so many things out there in the world with the programs and everything that
Yep.
you're a part of. What's that experience been like?
Well, you know, what I brought up a few times the why in the road, Brad, the why in the road. And for me, 8 years ago, I was speaking at an AA meeting and I gave my 20-minute share. And part of my share was, hey, what you heard, which was the childhood stuff, the college stuff, the arrest stuff. But then it's like, hey, I went and built this nice little career in entertainment. I opened up my own company. I started having a lot of interns work for me. I helped over 100 kids get their first and second jobs. I had done a couple successful startups. I was asked to teach at USC. I'm a father of 3 daughters. I'm a business owner. And so all this was in that package. And this little woman comes up to me after and she goes, "You would make a great group facilitator." It's like a female Yoda. "You would make a great group facilitator." I look down at her, I go, "Ma'am, I don't know what a group facilitator is." And she goes, "Well, let's go to coffee." We went to coffee and she goes, "Hey, it's someone who goes into rehabs and sober livings and gives their version of recovery." I said, "What's my version?" She goes, "What you just said in 20 minutes. That's your version." And that's 8 years ago, Brad. And so all of a sudden, here I was at a Y in the road. I wasn't really happy in my career because I was working in television commercials. And what was happening, the budgets were shrinking and the clients' problems were getting bigger. And those are 2 headaches I didn't want to have anymore. And all of a sudden, here I was using my version of recovery, the Gregg Champion version of recovery, right? To go into sober livings and treatment centers. And out of those first year or so, I began garnering this reputation. And then a dear friend, Jeffrey Van, and I connected. And he says, "Look, you got this great curriculum around going in there. It's called the Recovery Playbook and has to do with mentorship and entrepreneurship and all of a sudden, and getting sober young, right? Those are 3 big parts of it." He's, "Look, I'm good in business. I'm a good operator. I know the real estate market. Why don't you take it into a house and start running a program?" And all of a sudden, we had the name Startup Recovery. We had the tagline Shifting Addiction to Passion. And 6.5 years ago, we opened up and now we have 3 houses. We have apartments. We have a wellness center. We have a coaching curriculum. And I'm in it every day. I love showing up because here's the gift when the light goes on. When I get a young man or a young woman or a middle-aged person who's at a Y in the road and suddenly the light goes on and you see that they're going down the path, right? That's everything for me.
There is really nothing out there like experiencing that, or witnessing that for somebody to have the light bulb go on. I mean, just interesting for me anyway is how are you able to work through the situations where that doesn't happen? Do you ever experience that or have you?
For sure. When we first started the business, I wanted to bat 1,000. And I would get real angry when someone would go out, when someone wouldn't behave, when someone would not succeed. And my business partner wrangled me up and he said, "Hey, I need you to go talk to these 3 people." And he had me go talk to 3 people who had long-term sobriety and long-term success in the recovery business. And they all gave me the same advice. You ready? Working in recovery is not your recovery. Working in recovery is not your recovery. And so I really had to take time to make sure I was going to my meetings. I was reading the big book, right? And I was doing all that to better myself. And what I can tell you is I get real sad when I hear about an alumni going out and dying, going out and getting divorced, going out. I can't help but feel that. And I used to feel it was my fault, but now I just get sad. Brady, I will just tell you that I will never get over some of the people that have died in my life. It really, it hurts. More recently, I've had 2 people back to back who were in my life in December and January, and they both passed. And I honest to God had this thought. I thought, "Do I wanna continue doing this work? Do I wanna continue this work?" And what happens was I would share it with someone like you, and I know what you would tell me. You have to keep doing this work because if you don't, there's gonna be more people dying. And so I just realized that I can't save everybody, especially when they're not on my radar. And I just, yeah, I try to keep the people close. I will say this, that one thing that my sobriety and my work has done for me, Brad, and I know you're a father of small children. There's nothing like being a sober dad, right? There's nothing like being a sober dad. They are so proud of what I do and how I do it. They just are.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that. Anything, Greg, you'd like to leave us with before we sign off?
I just want to say that I watch you from afar, Brad, and you're the real deal. And you are a program of attraction. And I just want to say to your audience that because of technology, you and I get to do this podcast. We get to communicate via social media. And the both of us share this, that If anybody's in trouble, I just need you to do one thing. Put your hand in the air. Put your hand in the air and ask for help. Or if you're in a meeting or therapy, share your pain because I know in a meeting when I share my pain, I cut my pain in half. And so my thing is that we get sober, but you got to go do the work on the inside so you can grow up. We got to grow the fuck up, you know? And I never could be the father, the husband, the business owner today that I am today if I had not done the work, you know? And so I would just encourage everybody. And it doesn't have to be 12 steps, it can be therapy. It can be, there's so many ways to recovery, but you got to go do the work. Have that little kid, that little boy, that little girl grow up, and you watch, your whole world will change.
Yeah. Beautiful. Thank you so much, Greg, for joining and sharing your story today. I enjoyed it.
Thank you, Brad, for having me. And I look forward to seeing this out there soon. And like I said, when you can get the okay to come down, please come down and get some sunshine in Los Angeles with me, okay?
Yeah, we'll see what we can do, buddy. Well, there it is, everyone. Another episode. Huge shout out to Greg. I'll drop his contact information down in the show notes below if you want to reach out to him and send him a personal note and say thank you for jumping on the Sober Motivation podcast. You guys must do this a lot, which is extremely appreciated because a lot of the guests will message me that they got so many messages from people and they really appreciate it. And it really makes them feel good about sharing their story and being able to help other people and just give back in any way they can. And with Greg, it's no different. Greg brings a ton of experience to this episode 29 years in sobriety. He also works with people with startup recovery. And it's just incredible. It really stood out to me too about the thing where you get to see that light bulb go off. But also, the other side of that is when you don't get to see it go off, because I can relate to that back when I used to work at treatment center here in Ontario that was such a good feeling. It just felt like you were just part of changing somebody's life, and ultimately we have to change our own lives, but other people can definitely, I think, influence which direction we're gonna go, but it was so difficult when you saw that light bulb go on and then, I don't know, maybe weeks or months later, you'd get a call and kind of the flame was put out, and people were back at it and they were back out there and the consequences pile up quick. I don't know if any of you guys can relate to this, but after a relapse, it seems like we either get right back to where we were, or oftentimes you hear that it gets a lot worse. And that was the case for a lot of people. And for a lot of people, the light bulb didn't come on in the moment, but you got to always remember. And I always tell myself, we're in the business of planting seeds. It's planting seeds and hoping that it'll get watered a little bit here and a little bit there. And that was my experience too. I had tons of interventions over the years, rehab, meetings, therapy, doctors, counseling, hospital, you name it. But it was all planting seeds, and then they got watered a little bit here and a little bit there, and then, kind of out of the blue, it all made sense. And forward and onward. But thank you guys for hanging out for another episode. It's so exciting. I mean, 1 million downloads. We've got a lot of work left ahead of us. We're just getting started. Maybe that's the most exciting part about it. It's not always about the destination, but it's about the journey, right? So let's go out there and let's get another day, and I'll see you on the next one.